The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference. I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Needless to say, I have actually done an interview with Bill Natale. Now, he's directed, produced literally hundreds of commercials, wrote scripts for many, wrote a script for a short film produced in Chicago, directed, had been an associate producer. He has a background that will flip you out because, you know what? We need people like this because of the arts and the importance of the arts and the importance of writing things and producing things. This all has been a problem for the last year, and now it's better. So I'm so pleased to have him on my show, and I want to welcome Bill Natale.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You know, I'll tell you something. You teach children about the woolly worm. Now, before we actually ask you a question, this is a question, though. The woolly worm, what is that?
Well, a woolly worm is what a kid would call a caterpillar. So children, at least I know in my case, in my family, when we were little, we would call a caterpillar a woolly worm. And so I took that rather than caterpillar and made that into a short story. Actually, it started as a bedtime story for my kids. And then one day, after doing some promotional work and a production on behalf of the Harveys, Paul and Angel Harvey, for their son, who is a composer, Paul Laurent Jr., Mrs. Harvey asked me if there was anything I needed. I said, no, I'll send you the invoice. She goes, no, we'll pay the invoice. No, is there anything you'd like done? Do you have like a dream? And I said, well, yeah, I've got this children's story, but I'd love to see it published, but I don't really know any publishers. And she said, you do? Yes, you do. We publish. Mm-hmm. And I said, right. Really? And she said, yeah, we have a publishing company, which I didn't know about. Frankly, they had never asked me to do any publicity or anything along those lines. So anyway, she said, send me a copy of the story. I did. And she said, do you have an artist that can, take care of this? And I was working for WTTW at the time, which is the PBS station in Chicago. And I said, well, yeah, we've got a whole cadre of artists. Let me see if I can find one. And I did. And she said, I can do this super modern, or I can do this sort of like how a kid would do it. And I said, yeah, I like how a kid would do it. So that's what she did. And anyway, Laura wound up putting the pictures together, and we sent the pictures and the text to the publishing company of the Harveys, and next thing you know, 15,000 copies were coming off the line. And I didn't really want money for this. This was something I just wanted to do. So I told her, I said, all the money can go to the Infant Welfare Society, which she was president of. And I said, I'm not doing this for the money. And she said, okay. And they distributed it to, you name the museum or a gift shop. They had it in there. And so about $75,000 was raised because they were only charging $5 for the book. And she said, the next time you do a run, you keep the money. I laughed. I said, okay. And actually,
now, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt you. You know,
Sure.
you say, and this is coming straight from you, the story is as relevant today as it was then, and it deals with racist attitudes that are inculcated. Go ahead.
That's 1968. That's the actual first adult book I did. Yes, and that story is as relevant today as it was back in the day. So that's 1968. The children's story actually came first. The Secretary of State of Illinois, he himself alone bought 500 copies and placed it in the 500 State of Illinois libraries, which, if you live in Chicago, you're not really, at least I didn't. I wasn't even aware of them. But, yeah, it's all over the state of Illinois. So, but 1968.
I have to ask you something. Excuse me, I have to ask you something, and that is, right now, there's a situation going on in our schools, and that is that they're teaching racist theory or radical theory. What do you think about that?
Well, I would like to see what the curriculum is that they want to teach, because my own feeling on that is, if they're teaching history, which unfortunately is not taught accurately here in this country, that's one thing. If it's some sort of radical thing, that's another thing. But I believe what they're trying to get at, I could be wrong on this, but I think the intent here is to make sure that stories that, frankly, even a lot of African Americans are unaware of. It's only within I would say, the last half a year maybe, that Americans are now coming to terms with the Tulsa, with the Tulsa, Oklahoma riot, which is in the book, 1968, by the way, and they are only coming to terms with it now, going, really? We actually used the American Army Air Force at the time to bomb these people? So I think there's a lot of things in history that aren't taught, and they're not necessarily just, things about black culture or African. There's a number of things that aren't taught, period. The Trail of Tears is something that gets a paragraph or two, maybe, in a history book.
Explain that. Explain that to our audience, Bill. What is that exactly?
All right. The Trail of Tears is actually the long walk. When we think of long walks, we often think of the walks that our Marines had endured during World War II, and a 40-mile walk in which the majority of them were dead by the time they got them into Japanese prisoner camps. But Trail of Tears deals with the Indians had made treaties with the United States government, and they thought they had in Andrew Jackson, a friend who kept a treaty, because he had always sort of kept treaties before as a military man. But when he came into power as a president, there was a lot of pressure to move the Indians out of the North and South Carolina areas and move them west. Give them territory west, but get them out of here. And so, in effect, they actually were put on a trail, sent west, and it was called the Trail of Tears because so many of them died on the way. And they died from exhaustion. They died lack of food. They died. They were treated terribly. And once they got them moved west, then again, what happens later, not under him, but many years later, when they find themselves in Oklahoma, they're being pushed again now to Oklahoma. And finally, their chief said, okay, we'll move, but this time you don't move us again. We've been moved too many times. There's a very interesting book about that called The Purple Moon. It deals with the fact that once the Indians moved to Oklahoma, unbeknownst to anyone, they discovered oil on their lands, and they became multimillionaires. And a lot of people didn't like that, and as a result, a lot of these Indians wound up being killed. They had these lavish homes. They had I'm talking early 1900s now, but they could afford to have these crown jewel kind of automobiles, like the Mercedes-Benz that actually came out of Germany. But they could afford this. They could afford to have the finest in furniture. They could afford to have huge parties. I mean, because of the oil money. And once again, they were moved again. But this time they were not moved by the government. They were moved by, frankly, racism. I mean, people, they were shot to death. A number of them were killed and basically taught that you better leave if you want to even have your life. So we know from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that an entire district, Brownville district, was burnt to the ground, and this was an extremely successful area of blacks who had decided, okay, we can't shop in the white area, so we'll create our own banks, and we'll create our own stores, and we'll create our own. So there's been, unfortunately, to minorities in this country, not all, but to a number of them, there have been, unfortunately, a loss of dignity given to them when they become too successful.
Let me stop you now. I want to tell you a story, Bill. Many years ago, I went to Fisk University, and I interviewed the Freedom Riders. But one of the interesting things about the Freedom Riders is that they were bullied. They were hit with stones. They were fighting with, people who tried to really take advantage of them. But they were not fighting like you think about now. They were fighting with the understanding of peace. And that's the difference today. Before, it was all about peace. Martin Luther King, peace, okay? But when you think about what's going on today, it's not about peace. So tell me what you think about this situation.
Well, you're never, ever going to have an American society that accepts any group that tries to use violence to promote themselves. That's just never going to happen. In the case of Martin Luther King, and I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go to Memphis and see the National Civil Rights Museum. I took my son and my grandson there, but in those halls, which are actually tied to the motel in which he was shot dead, Martin Luther King, the motel is right there, and it's all part of the museum. What you see is picture upon picture upon picture upon picture, or incident upon incident of blacks being hung. That's what what that song, "The Forbidden Fruit's" all about. That the U.S. government tried to get Dorothy Dandridge to stop singing. Anyway. My point is this: violence is never going to work, and Martin Luther King knew that. And he basically saw what Gandhi did in India, and I've been to India too, and know a little bit about that story. But he saw what Gandhi did, and he saw that nonviolence was the only way. And it worked here, because as soon as the film crews were able to capture what happened in Birmingham with the dogs and the hoses, and that aired on television stations also throughout the rest of the country, that's when you could see a crack in the armor, so to say, of let's say the Jim Crow South, and where you had a lot of unwritten laws, but at the same time, people knew better. We saw that with the young boy that went to Emmett Till, what happened with him. So, violence isn't going to work either way. And it doesn't work whether you're a racist or you're not a racist. It doesn't work because, it just won't. So if you're going to make a change, you're going to have to do it nonviolently. But again, as we see with many things, including the women's right to vote. It was the protests that made the difference.
That's right. I want to know, I'm moving on for a second because you wrote another book that deals with the opiate addiction, and that is really a tragedy in our country today. Why did you write that book, and what is significant about it?
Well, I wrote the book, initially, the way I wrote the book, because the book that's out right now is the 11th rewriting of the book. But anyway, I wrote the book because of the fact that 100 to 120 Americans were dying every day. Matter of fact, the number is now down to about 79, but it's still around 79 to 80 every day die from opioid addiction. And I wrote the book because I saw what happened to a lot of families, some very close friends. I can report that within my own family, we had opioid addiction issues for some of our members of our family, and I saw what happened. And, it all starts out very almost genuinely, let's just say it's anything but threatening. They're prescribed prescriptions, and so you take the opioids to alleviate the pain, which are that's a wonderful thing if you can alleviate pain. I had terrible myself personally. I took the opioids to alleviate back pain until I had my surgery. So there's nothing really wrong with opioids per se. What's wrong with them is what we saw, the way that the pharmaceutical companies pushed them, the way they were paying their salespeople to pay doctors off, basically. How is it that in a town of 9,000 in West Virginia, they shuffled through that town over 900,000 pills? Now, 60 Minutes did a story on it, and this happens to everybody. In Ohio, in Chester County, the wife of the sheriff had a terrible opioid addiction problem that came to the forefront in the newspaper. So this didn't happen to just people who were low lives and bad people. This happened to a lot of good people because they've been prescribed the opioids. In my case, I was taking Vicodin, which is an opioid for the back pain, and it's innocent enough. And then what happens is you get hooked, and then you can't live your life without them. And we know that the pharmaceutical companies that were sued and finally had to put up billions of dollars in reparations, we know that this was because of their marketing. This wasn't because of the product they made. This was because of how they marketed the opioids. So I just thought it was a subject that needed attention, and I spent over 3.5 years working on the book. And again, nobody wanted to publish the book. I was told that by my agent. Nobody's going to publish this until you start making it a more palatable story. Until the story actually is told from the perspective of a family dog. And so once I got that and a little bit of humor and, that sort of thing, and then I finally got some people who said, yeah, okay, we'll take a look at that. And I actually had a couple of publishers willing to publish it. And finally went with Image Press. And, so I come across these subjects that I think are important. Like in the case of 1968, that's based on a true story. I found two brothers who actually wound up working in an all-black factory. The only person in there that was white was the owner, and it was right after the 1968 Martin Luther King assassination and the riots here in Chicago. And they had a fascinating story, and I spent about 3 years working on that too, even though that book isn't as many pages. And finally brought that to fruition as well.
One of the other things that you've written about is happiness. Happiness is a very difficult thing when you're going through a pandemic. How could you be happy? People who work, people who own shops, everything was taken away from them. And they had to lead a life that was really quite difficult. What do you think about and what do you feel when you say happiness? Is everybody supposed to be happy? And if you can be happy, can things change for the population, for people in general?
Well, Adelaide Books is publishing, and it's releasing on August 16th, my new book called Bliss. And bliss is, we think of it as happiness, but everybody's happiness isn't the same. For example, in the story of Bliss, we have a character who winds up killing someone. And that for him is his bliss, okay? Bliss, unique and unusual, actually, is the full title. But anyway, the point is that what might make someone happy, might not make the other person happy. And what might make someone happy, we'd look at it and say, boy, that's a weird sort of thing. And yet, we have that all the time. So that is a collection of short stories. There's 32 in all. And they go from one page to one that's 46 pages. The one that's 46 pages deals with Mr. Rogers. So that's probably the only one in that book that's completely fictionalized. But anyway, again, I think this is a very subjective subject. What might make you happy, Susan, might not make me happy. And what might make me happy, you'd say, no, not my cup of tea. And we know that for a fact anyway. In other words, I love baseball. I'm not such a big football fan, but my grandson loves it. I mean, and he's crazy about football. And so, we all have tastes that are different, and we all react differently. And happiness is very, very subjective. You have someone who is depressed, and yet they're living in the life of the Vanderbilts. I mean, there's a book out that a good friend of mine wrote, The Social Graces. It just came out. I'm into it now. Renee Rosen is the author. She's got about 6 books. The last 2 have been bestsellers. And, you kind of say to yourself, well, when you have the kind of wealth that the Vanderbilts have, of course you're going to be happy. But we all know money doesn't necessarily buy you happiness, even though the Beatles did, talked about it.
I'm moving on with another situation, another question, which is really about the media and the effect of the media on the population, on people in general, because, needless to say, the media have a lot of people listening. And when they listen, what do you think they're hearing? They're hearing stories that are, just talking about the pandemic over and over. They're talking about all the problems in our country and, our presidents, everything.
Right.
Now, with that said, so what do you think of the media? Do you think the media is honest, or do you think they lie? And do they do it all for ratings or power, if you will? What's your thoughts about that, Bill?
Well, on the media, a couple of things. Having been someone who has worked in the media almost all my life, I see things that I kind of say to myself, why did they allow that to happen? Ronald Reagan is probably a perfect example. And I'm going to tell you right now, I was a big fan of Ronald Reagan. So there's probably people out there that might not have liked Ronald Reagan, but I thought he was a great communicator, and I thought he was a pretty good president. And I think a lot of things happened, including, let's say, some success with Gorbachev and the end of the Cold War. But one thing he did, which to this day, I can't understand, is he allowed Rupert Murdoch to become a citizen and therefore, get into the media. And Rupert basically said, and also Reagan went along with the people he put in as the FCC commissioner and the people who were the commissioners at that time that he brought in, they said, well, you know what, there's this fairness doctrine, and we don't necessarily think that's apropos. So there was a time, I'll tell you, as a guy who's been in broadcasting for 40 years, there was a time when if you had a conservative on, you had to have a liberal on. If you had a liberal on, you had to have a conservative. You always had to have opposing viewpoints on when you covered something. Now you will only find that probably today on PBS, BBC, NHK, which is Japan, and Deutschland TV. I mentioned them all. So you're only going to find that on, networks like that. And for the most part, it's all one way or the other way. So in other words, if you're going to watch MSNBC, you're going to hear everything that's left. If you're going to watch Fox, you're going to hear everything that's right. You're never really going to get a viewpoint from both sides. Now I will credit Bill O'Reilly, who's written a number of books. I think I've read almost every one of his books, but I will give Bill O'Reilly a certain amount of credit. On Fox, on top of everything, he was one of the few people that would always have an opposing spokesperson, opposing viewer. I think if we could get back to that, then I think you leave it up to people to make their own decision and decide. That's the way the media used to do things. They would put the facts out there, and then you could either say that's good or that's bad or that's not for me or that is for me or whatever. But that's not what, unfortunately, that's not what we have today. We have networks and viewpoints that are slanted one way or the other. And I think it would just do everyone a great service if we can have people from both sides of the spectrum on any program to give both sides. Then leave it up to the public. Then the public can decide. And that's the problem, in my opinion, that's the problem with the media.
Well, it's almost at the end of the show, Bill, but here's what I always say to my guests. If you had the last word, what would you say? Because I'm sure you might have another book coming out soon, and I'd like our audience to know about that. And what else is in store for you, basically?
Well, besides Bliss coming out in August, which I'm now we're lining up people for the back cover and that sort of thing. I am, and I have been working now for well over a year on a look at life in the 50s. Now, why did I pick the 50s? I picked the 50s because it was probably a time when people in this country were extremely pleased with life in general, in terms of and the ability to reach a middle class status, which a lot of people were very happy to live in a middle class status. Eisenhower was a very popular president. Some of the things that were in his platform, wow, you'd almost say he was an ultra-liberal, compared to, if you were to look at the platform of 1956. But it was also a time when only one person in the family had to work, not both the mom and the dad. Moms, for the most part, kind of had a chance to stay home and raise the children. People, for the most part, I think, were pretty pleased with life. Now, why is that? Could be because they'd been through a world war. Could be because a lot of people, especially the adults, knew what it was to be in a depression. Even if they were in a depression as a child, now as an adult, they knew, wow, I can almost, if I work hard enough, I can just about buy anything. I can buy a better home. I can buy a nicer car. We can live better. We can go on vacations. And we can do most of that on one salary. And so if I had a final word, it'd be nice. I think it's really important that we protect, our class structure and that there is a middle class. Because I've been in countries, especially in Africa, where you're either rich or you're poor. There's no in between. And the same thing frankly, for what I saw in Southeast Asia as well, when I've been there. So I'd like to see a return to the thriving and a successful middle class. It will be good for those on top, and it'll even be good for those on bottom, because the people on bottom will say, okay, there's hope there. I can aspire to a better life.
Yeah. My guest today has been Bill Natale, who is really a very interesting man. He's a writer. He's worked in television. He's done so many different things. And I think you'll learn a lot about what he did by reading some of his books, because needless to say, his books cover everything, and they're relevant to even today. So with that said, again, thank you very much for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well. Thank you for having me, Susan.
You're quite welcome.